Hey guys, Kate here for this week's Primitive Podcast. What we've tried to do here recently is share more content that is relevant given the times and all that is going on with the coronavirus and what feels like an economic meltdown. And so on this week's podcast, we had Zach Holtzman. Zach is the owner of Holtzman Wealth Strategies. And what the idea behind this week's podcast was really just to brainstorm and talk out loud with a financial professional on how people may view their own personal finances, as well as try to understand what's going on at a national and international level. And so Zach shared several very practical tips on how one might view their personal finances, as well as sharing some just different insight and advice really on kind of the global economy. So I found it really fascinating. And if you're like me, you're thinking a lot about a lot of things right now in your life. But one of them is certainly your own personal finances, as we all kind of deal with and embrace the unknown. So I hope this week's episode is helpful to you. And as usual, if there's anything that I can do personally for you, please let me know. But thank you for listening. Really appreciate your attention. And thanks for giving it a listen. Well, Zach, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate you in the midst of all this craziness, taking some time to be on the podcast. Really glad to have you. So let's start off by you just kind of introducing yourself and telling our audience, a bit about you and your background and all that good stuff.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the program, Kate. I I grew up in Austin, Texas, and I currently own Holtzman Wealth Strategies, a small business here in Lubbock, Texas. And I come from a background. My dad was a CPA in Austin. My mom was a preschool director, and basically I, grew up just going to work with my dad and I guess around numbers a lot, which sounds not too exciting to a lot of people, but I really enjoyed going up there to see all he did day to day, and that kind of pointed me to the direction I'm in the career that I'm in now, which is a little bit different. But anyway, growing up in Austin, we contributed to the Keeping Austin Weird theme down there. So uh, I brought that same mentality up here to Lubbock, and went to Texas Tech University and uh, graduated from there back in 2002, and that's where I met the love of my life. I tricked her into marrying me, Jennifer, and so we've been married ever since 2002. Gosh, no, I'm going down a rabbit hole. August of 2002.
Okay.
Um, and we've got three boys. Preston's 13, Garrett 11, and Ethan is 8. And yeah, we're just doing everything we can, especially nowadays, to keep them active, doing chores, and starting this new age of school from
Yeah.
home right now.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy times, isn't it? So, tell us a little bit about your practice. Like, what do you do at Holtzman? Financial. I mean, what is it that you do?
Yeah. Well, Holtzman Wealth Strategies. One of the things I failed to mention too, on a little bit of background here too, is I got into the investment industry at a very rough time, August of 2008. And if
Oh wow, perfect
the
timing.
history buffs, yeah, the history buffs remember that it was the worst recession since the Great Depression. And basically, I got in and joined a big company called Edward Jones. A lot of people are familiar with that. Um, built my business through there and had wonderful training. I still keep up with a lot of the folks at Edward Jones, a lot of the other advisors there. And back in May of 2018, I actually decided to just go out and hang my own shingle. Um, I, it was nothing against Edward Jones. It was mainly just to go out and kind of be a little more in control of my destiny here.
For sure.
And so what we do, at Holtzman Wealth Strategies, I work with a lady, her name's Rhonda Hodges. We work together very closely, but we work with clients basically to help them and their families establish a financial goal and help basically chart a course to get there, whether that's saving for retirement, planning for a college education, or just even something like saving for another house or something else on down the road. Just help define what their goal is and then use the investments to get them there.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really good background. So you have some experience helping individuals, in the midst of the crisis, of a financial crisis, 08, 09 being a good example. Of course, there's a lot of unknown about our current situation, with everything that's going on with the coronavirus and, all the interesting things happening within the economy right now. And so I guess there is a lot of unknown, but there's one thing we do know is it's highly volatile and super challenging. And so what would you say, what kind of best practices or tips would you give people, on an individual level who are currently evaluating their personal financial situation and trying to really figure out like how to handle their personal finances, how to view their personal finances in the midst of, kind of so much volatility and craziness within the markets and everything going on right now in the world?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like the word that keeps coming up over and over again is the word unprecedented. So,
Right. Yeah, it
I
is,
mean,
isn't it?
it is, and it really is. This is so many people, including, I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say this is just a little very challenging for someone,
Right.
even in my field. But um, I think one of the things we've got to take a step back, and for someone who's just trying to look at their current financial situation right now and it's saying, okay, am I okay right now? It can be very much just dependent on what's going on in their own life. So I think I'll tackle it a couple different ways. Um, I think it very, regardless whether we're going through what we're going through now or when, not if, but when we come out of this, it's important to review your spending. Um, if you don't already have one, get on a personal budget. And I like to recommend an app. It's called Mint. Mint is a free app you can get on the App Store, and it'll track your spending in real time. It can notify you basically like when you've exceeded your spending threshold, and it's very user friendly for folks. And you can kind of compile everything together to help to know, okay, this is what I've spent on eating out, or this is what I've spent on, uh, you know, groceries or whatever. So that helping to organize your finances now, especially now, can be very important with everything going on.
Yeah.
Also, you know, I got to assume there's been so many folks, their income has been impacted in the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Right.
So trying to look for expenses in your budget that you can do without for now. No one likes to eliminate some of these fun things, right? But if your income is now maybe 50% of what it was, or now, I mean, unfortunately, maybe there's a layoff that happened. It's now's the time you've got to determine what are your needs.
Mm.
Is cable television need? Is Netflix really that important to have? I don't want to sound insensitive. It's just something it's worth scaling back on some spending right now. Take a break from eating out so much. Just find out what spending looks like to reflect your current reality. One thing I think a lot of people have been doing, I've noticed more, especially with interest rates significantly. I mean, they're at all-time lows. Refinancing your home could make very much sense right now. If you've got a home with an interest rate up north of 4%, it's worth talking to someone about, well, how that's another way you can refinance your home, save a little bit of money here and there on a month-to-month basis with even a less ongoing payment if you can refinance, and it can make a difference that way. So I think right there are a couple things.
Really good start. Yeah. Like in your line of work, maybe in your line of work, you're dealing with, individuals that have a different level of income. I have no idea. I guess I don't want to assume that. But,
Sure.
in your line of work, how many, or maybe just in general, as you've been in this industry for a long time, how often do you find people, like you mentioned having a budget, which sounds like an obvious thing, but like, is it pretty common for people not to have a budget at all? And I mean, do you find that, like, what does that look like when you're working with people?
Yeah, unfortunately, the common aspect I do see is people don't have a budget established. You know, we find time and time again that the importance of having a budget is directing. You're being proactive, saying where you want your money to go, right? Instead of reacting and saying, "Oh no, I don't have any more money. That my I spent it all over here or over here." And but being proactive and setting a budget will dictate where your money is supposed to go, and it's much more. I think a healthier way of addressing your finances instead of just kind of, hey, let's see what happens here, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think planning and intentionality makes a lot of sense to people in most realms, and it is interesting, why financially it tends to be so commonplace for there not to be a plan, not to have goals and objectives, not to have parameters, not to have a budget. And if someone were signing up for a marathon, I don't think they wouldn't even dreamt of trying to run a marathon and not having a weekly running plan. And yet, when we look at our finances, oftentimes we just don't have a plan. And I would think a plan now, when things are so urgent and unknown, is even more critical, even than under normal circumstances.
Absolutely, I like that. I'm going to use that, running a marathon, because I don't run marathons, but I think that resonates.
Yeah, no, yeah, and yeah, it is a good analogy, and like you don't just wake up either one day and ready to run a marathon. It's a journey, and unfortunately, your finances are the same way. And that kind of leads me to my next question: is like, I hate to assume, but just given if you ever listen to Dave Ramsey or other folks like him, large portions of Americans don't have a plan or a budget, and live paycheck to paycheck. And so if you're one of those people right now, you're obviously kind of reeling, and you're trying to figure out what's up and what's down. And so what advice would you give someone regarding planning for future challenges similar to this? I mean, would it be really similar to the advice you just gave in terms of evaluating your current situation? Because inevitably, I mean, hopefully we don't face anything like this in terms of, this kind of scale. I mean, 3.2 million people applied for, unemployment last week, which, like you said, is unprecedented. So hopefully we don't ever experience something like this in the future to this extent. But what if we do? What kind of advice would you give someone in terms of proactively, preparing and creating kind of a plan?
Yeah, I mean, planning for the future, you can do that right now, even amidst a crisis we're going through, because this isn't going to be the last crisis we're going to
Right.
experience, unfortunately. Um, Getting financially healthy, one of the very first steps we recommend to everybody who doesn't have it is, and I know this is Dave Ramsey, it's going off the same thing. Get 3 to 6 months of your expenses and just set it aside. Don't get investing it. Don't buy a big screen TV with that money. This is what's called an emergency fund. And an emergency fund is designed to basically, you may go through a period like what we're going through now, where, oh no, there's a layoff. Um, you may have a water heater that just went busted in your home. Um, a car just needs some significant repairs. You can use that emergency fund to pull from it, so you're not completely just relying on credit card debt, to start, you know, racking up credit card debt that'll, start charging you 13, 14,
Right.
up to 18% to borrow from a credit card.
Absolutely. No, it's all good advice. It's strikingly similar to a lot of what I've thought about in terms of even preparing a business for future crises, right? Like a lot of things you're advising even on a personal finances are super applicable to a business in terms of really kind of preparing for a challenge like this. So all really good advice. So many people I feel like don't live in the world of economics. Certainly, not on a national level, and certainly not on an international level. So, what kind of advice would you give a layperson who's getting all these things thrown at them now, both on a national and an international, kind of economic level. Like, how would you encourage someone to absorb that information? How would you encourage them to process it? Is it even necessary to process it? I mean, how would you interact with, a layperson? Again, you kind of live in this world on a daily basis. And for many of us, me included, I'm not paying attention to what's like going on in the economy necessarily on a daily basis. So how would you encourage someone to try to understand and absorb that information?
Yeah, that's a good question. I sometimes like trying to explain finances or thoughts on economy can be kind of like the teacher on Ferris Bueller's Day Off, just that kind of, oh man, did I just lose somebody? So I'll try to simplify it as best I can. And I'm not want to stand here and say I'm Mr. Economist here by any means, but
Sure.
I do believe today we we live in a global economy, right? So, and that's very evident with this coronavirus going on. It's affecting the globe. Um, and so, one thing I just would want to stress about this: don't get too much in the weeds about, you know, because if you can separate the economy with what the stock market is doing, you got two different things going on here too. Um, 50% of the global economy comes outside of our country.
Hmm.
So if we're talking about investing, just investing in general, it may make sense to consider investing outside of some of your money outside of the United States, right? Um, Listen, I'm not going to give specific recommendations on anything, but
Sure.
if we're just confined, like from an investment strategy, if we're just confining all our investments to one country, we'll call it, United States of America. It's kind of like if you went to the grocery store and all you did was shop on the inside of the aisles. You missed completely the outside of the aisles too. So, with a global economy, you want to take advantage of 100% of the global economy.
Right.
And so that's kind of one thing you can do to simplify with what's going on right now. If what's going on in America or what's going over in China, does that resonate with what's going on with you here in America? So
This might be an ignorant question, but when you say, obviously, okay, so it makes sense to me that we're a global economy, makes sense. And when you say, 50% of that global economy is made up of countries outside of the US, that makes sense. So again, this may sound super ignorant, but does that mean that the American economy is 50% roughly of the global economy?
yeah, so like when I say like our revenue, like 70% of our revenue here in the US is you and I just spending money. And so if 50% of our global economy mainly comes from the United States of America.
Wow.
And so that's where we tell people, hey, that's important. You want to take advantage of, from an investment standpoint, the number one country economically in the world right now, which is the
Yeah.
US, thankfully. So yes, that is true.
It's interesting, and I think the reason it's so interesting is because most of us just kind of live our daily lives, right? Like we can barely see, kind of beyond what's right in front of us on a day-to-day basis. But in a situation like this, it becomes, increasingly obvious that the whole world is connected, on many levels, but especially a financial and economic level. And so when something like this happens, there's so many factors outside of an individual's just daily life. And I think that's what causes so much uncertainty unknown, even in your personal finances, is that there's so many variables impacting it that most of us don't spend any time thinking about, which is why it's so intriguing during times like this to try to decipher and understand, the news and the
Yeah.
story it's telling as it relates to kind of the global impact of this, not just, an impact where you're at. So it's also fascinating.
Well, also, I think it's important to, I mean, the news, I don't want to say all news is the same, but a lot of the news that comes out, um, if we take a step back and realize that the news is their main job, they want to a lot of times draw viewership. How do you draw viewership? Well, if the more fear you can have, I think there could be more viewership, more eyeballs on the screen. So don't let the news or the media dictate your investment strategy. Um, I would say too. I mean, a lot of times you see on different news outlets, here's the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the stock market's down X percent today, or the S&P 500 dropped X percent today. And it's in big red letters. It can look scary when you look at that. Well, remember that if you have a diversified portfolio of U.S. stocks, international stocks, bonds, and any other investments, this is not your current experience. So if you're spreading your risk out, yes, your money is impacted, but not to the same degree unless you're like a higher risk taker and you have 100% in the stock market. So just remember that's not your current reality if your risk is spread out.
Yeah, makes total sense. All right, maybe the last question for you. What are some practical resources someone could check out to help, kind of help them process all that's going on, especially kind of on I guess both maybe a personal financial level, and then if those who are listening are interested in more of the kind of investment strategy and more of the national kind of take, some of the things you're talking about, what kind of resources would you steer someone to check out?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'd recommend again, trying to simplify this. What we're seeing right now is so important for people, and so I can fail miserably at doing that sometimes. So
Right.
I think someone like Dave Ramsey, you mentioned him. I follow him a lot, and he just has very practical words of wisdom to help people get through this. He's a good one. I think if you want to, you can go to our company's website, holtzmanwealth.com. We have a resources tab where we try to help investors and people to go through trying times like we're going through right now to help you get more financially healthy. So you can go on our website there and find some more. I'm also a big podcast guy. So not just because I'm on here, but there's a couple of podcasts I'd recommend. One it's called Capital Ideas.
Okay.
And the other one, it's called The Bid, BID. And so those two podcasts are geared more towards, themes for moving forward in the investment landscape we're in. So they can help provide a little bit more clarity amidst all this noise we're hearing.
What was the first one? What?
Capital Ideas.
Ideas. No, that's good. Awesome. And then The Bid. Yeah, I'll check those out. I love podcasts.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. The only one I would add is the Morning Brew. So it's actually a daily newsletter that comes straight to your email inbox. And it's really good in terms of summarizing what's going on in the business world. So it's not just related to personal finances or certain investment strategies or whatever, but just in terms of getting an update, especially right now, it's pretty interesting given the volatility of everything. And they do a really good job of distilling it down into, extremely understandable. So they take complex ideas and make it, easier for lay people like me to understand. So I look forward to checking out those podcasts and have been an avid follower of Dave Ramsey for a long time. I'd be embarrassed to acknowledge the number of hours I've listened to his show. And so, yeah, that's a good one.
Did you call it the Morning Brew?
The Morning Brew. Yep. It's a newsletter. And I think they may also have a podcast. I haven't checked that out yet. But the newsletter itself is really, really good. And I've found it extremely interesting, especially now with kind of how everything's changing and all that.
Huh. I'll check it out.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Zach, thanks so much. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us. And especially during these interesting times. So thanks for taking the time to be with us.
You bet. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Zach.
Thanks.